Our guest this week has been denounced in Canada's House of Commons. And over nearly half a century career, premiers, prime ministers, presidents, queens, dictators, and popes have all felt the sting of his craft. And why? Because Christopher Terry Mosher has a devout hatred for intolerant and entitled people. You may know him as the genius Aislin. Today I have the chance to sit down and talk to one of our city's true legends. But first, we look back on his life. Born just a few blocks away from Parliament Hill in Ottawa, to a working mother and an adventurous bohemian father, the family moved around a lot, and the young Terry Mosher attended 14 different schools, causing trouble wherever he went. By the time he was a teenager, he described himself as a partial delinquent. While hitchhiking to Vancouver, he was picked up by a guy headed for Florida, and he went along for the ride. It was in the midst of the 60s hippie revolution, and Terry Mosher jumped in head first. He reveled in the poverty and the hangovers, even being arrested a few times, but it was all part of his life experience. While on the road, he discovered his art, creating over 3,000 works while he toured around North America. Terry Mosher then did what he calls his greatest work. He made a fake high school graduation certificate, and the deception got him into art college in Quebec City. It was while doing sidewalk portraits in the provincial capital that the name Aislin began. Looking for anonymity, he signed the first name of his newborn daughter, and it stuck: Aislin. His work now hangs in the Vatican and Buckingham Palace. But Terry Mosher's personal life in the 70s was racked with indulgence. He describes it as being on the edge of oblivion, almost killing himself and destroying his first marriage along the way. The dilemma was he believed the effect of drugs and alcohol was helping his work. How could he stop? For over a decade, he didn't. Today, sober, but he has the guts to admit he still misses the culture of abuse, especially some of the friends that sobriety forces you to leave behind. But as he says, you begin to appreciate the simple things in life: biking, watching the river run, and a wife who is willing to put up with him.
You know, one of the things I didn't do, Terry, because I've known you personally for a while, and I've never really read your biography, and I was reading some stuff last night, and I really chuckled to myself when I found out you were born in the shadow of the Parliament buildings. Just, I just love this. It's like a delicious irony to that.
Yeah. Well, I had a, for a kid who was brought up in, I guess, the 40s, although I don't remember any of that, but 50s primarily, the formative years, I had a delightfully interesting childhood. And part of that was my parents. My dad was a writer, freelance writer, and when he couldn't get jobs writing, he would get odd jobs. Like, for a while, he was a store detective at Ogilvy's.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, because it was a job that was available. I think he knew a cop or something, and somebody got him his job. But he wouldn't arrest anybody. What he'd do is he'd take them out and buy them a cup of coffee and take notes for his writing, about writing short stories about shoplifters and stuff. So he was a really interesting guy in that way, and an unusual guy. My mother was the straight person in the family. She had to be. So she always had jobs working for boroughs or advertising agencies, and she's very reliable, very good with money, and always brought money home. Where my dad, it was hot and cold.
Right.
We'd have thousands of dollars laying around and then nothing for months.
Right.
And so I got a little bit of both of them. 7 years old at the time, and I spent from the time I was 7 to I was 13 or 14, very formative years in downtown Montreal, and that's what I really kind of remember. That's where I think I kind of got formed during the time of the Rocket Richard riots, that sort of thing. I mean, I was at the riot with my dad, and I saw, hey, wait a minute, there's something going on here.
Yeah, you arrived in Quebec just as the upheaval began.
Exactly,
wow.
But there's something, the French element to the riot and the anti-English Clarence Campbell stuff. Wait a minute, this is kind of interesting. And so that's kind of where I guess the interest in this political stuff in Quebec kind of began.
As you're hitchhiking and drawing and finding out about different art jobs, talent is developing at this point?
Talent is developing, but also an ability to drink. Even the hangovers were fun, Terry, back then. It was just, I was young and rambunctious and finding myself in bars. I mean, I went all over, bars in Chicago. I remember suddenly looking and realized I'm the only white guy in a bar, but it was okay.
It sounds like you had a ball.
Yeah, I did.
You did have a ball.
I got to tell you.
Yeah.
I was just having a terrific time for a young lad.
It's a bit of a Jack Kerouac thing going on, eh?
Well, I had read Jack Kerouac.
You?
You'll love this. I read Jack Kerouac, and I remember the section from Detroit to Chicago. He took a bus. He got frustrated. I hitchhiked it, and I got to Chicago. I said, "Fuck you, Jack. I did it." So yeah, there was a Jack Kerouac element.
How long does this go on? This man about
couple of years.
Couple of years
and then
around the continent.
I began to descend more on Quebec City.
How come?
I loved Quebec City. I just
did you hitchhike there and go?
Yeah, no,
whoa.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. I said, "Whoa, look at this! This is like Europe." So it was just about meeting young girls and everybody sort of humoring you, and it was just, whoa! It was wonderful.
Was the 70s, wasn't it, at this point?
No, this is still the 60s.
Still the 60s? Okay.
But marijuana was around, and speed and stuff, different things. LSD.
Yeah. So was that all part of your playground? Because you've been very honest in previous interviews about there was a time when you, let's say, as they say in Frank Magazine, were overserved. And,
sure.
And spend a lot of time.
Let me put it very simply. What happened was rambunctious. The body could take it.
Yeah.
As I say. And
19 and bulletproof.
You bounce back. Met a wonderful girl there. Very rapidly fell in love, got married, and within a couple of years, suddenly I had children, 2 kids. What happened, What happened to the... Well, I got a little less rambunctious for a while anyway, and I had hitchhiked to New York City.
There's the thumb again.
I hitchhiked to New York City and got a couple of jobs for magazines.
Oh, wow, cool.
Doing illustrations.
Yeah.
And then... when I went to Montreal and showed up at magazines there, they said, "You've been published in New York?" I said, yeah. I had no idea that...
It's a big deal.
It was serendipity, right? And suddenly, in 1967, I was working for everybody.
Wow.
I had a really fast... Within 2 years, I was doing covers for Time magazine.
That's a huge deal back then.
$1,000 too.
Oh, $1,000 in 1967.
Well, it was actually 69, my first cover. But still.
I mean, $1,000 is a lot of money. That's back when people were making $8,000 a year.
It's fantastic.
Eh? Yeah. Wow.
And so, but I should say that the first couple of years in Montreal, you got to remember there were so many publications here at that time. Yeah. I was working for underground publications, overground publications. Right. So again, it was kind of madcap coming here. And I began meeting some real interesting characters downtown. And a bar called the Boiler Room, and then there was Winston Churchill right next door, and did a whole succession of bars. But people like Nick Oftermore, Vittorio, a whole bunch of sort of interesting characters. Ben and
well, I have to say, I mean, I got a little taste of that in the late 1980s. It was not uncommon to go into a bar in downtown and bump into, at the same bar, Michael Sarrazin, Mordecai Richler, Nick Oftermar, who's usually sitting with a Supreme Court justice from Illinois, or a counselor that he met in Vancouver,
or a blonde. But at the same time, I'm getting kind of successful. Montreal Star offered me a job. I said only if I can freelance, and I'm working a lot of, it's like I'm getting really successful, and the work is unusual. You got to remember, I was also thought of as being quite radical back then.
Yeah. Do you remember your first political cartoon?
Yeah, it was,
what was it?
The Montreal Star phoned me up because the cartoonist at the Montreal, they were aware of me, and the cartoonist at the Montreal Star had just broken his leg skiing, and I didn't do it, you know?
Yeah.
And they said, can you give us a cartoon for tomorrow?
Yeah.
And so I scrambled around and got a cartoon together, and it was all about the cops raiding an African dance thing at a theater where they were performing topless or something. So I drew a cartoon of cops having taken photographs, running off copies for themselves, some silly thing like that. But that was the start of it.
Well, Montreal was a very different place back then. It was a little more wild, and it was Canada's biggest city, and I guess it was a great playground for a cartoonist or somebody drawing.
It was a playground, and always has been, and always will be, and intellectually very, very interesting. I mean, it even at that point, it wasn't no longer the largest city, but boring Toronto was down the road.
Yeah.
But it was and still is, Canada's most engaging, interesting city.
Right.
And that's why I think we thrive here. Terry, today, we have 6 working daily cartoonists in Montreal. New York has 1.
Wow.
LA has 2.
Wow.
So that the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
The fact that we have really interesting politics here
Yeah.
is in that alone.
Well, you've said, I've heard you or read that you've agreed that we should be our own little state, don't you think?
I've always, Leonard Cohen said it first, I remember way back in the mid-'60s, he said Montreal should be a city-state. I think that would be fucking perfect.
Absolutely.
I think that.
And that should be the slogan. This would be fucking perfect.
Exactly. I think it would be great.
How long? When did you realize you thought I'm
because I'm a Montrealer before I'm anything. Of course, I'm
That's interesting because
I'm a Canadian.
Yeah, I always think Canadian first, and then I say to myself, and this is another thing, and I think you'll relate to this. The farther west I go, the bigger separatist I become.
Oh yeah, sure.
Isn't it?
All of us.
All of us. We become bigger. The farther west I move, the bigger defender of
You meet
Quebec.
some guy in Winnipeg who speaks
like
you fucking Quebecers,
you
just want to whack him.
Yeah. I'd like you to talk a little bit about Mary, because
sure.
I'm a fan of when you speak about Mary, your wife. You say she really is your friend and your partner, and she's involved in all aspects of your life. How did you meet Mary, and how involved is she with you on a day-to-day basis with everything? I'd like people to know that side of it, because I think it's an important part of your life.
It's a love story.
It is a love story. It's exactly what it is.
Yeah, she's Mary and I had actually known each other for quite a while because she worked at the Gazette, and apparently I had run into her in a bar once. I don't remember this. I had run into her at a bar, and she had said something about, "Hi, I work at the Gazette, and I'm an artist too." And I the classy thing, right? And she said, "I'm never going to speak to that guy again."
Yeah, that's the end
so
of you.
I had no memory of it, but occasionally I'd see her on the elevator at the Gazette, and I couldn't figure out why this girl would sort of cower away. What's wrong with her? Anyway. And then it was actually technology, because when the computers were really starting to become prominent, I got a computer. I wasn't sure about it. I needed some advice. I had one person, but it turned out that Mary really knew her stuff.
Right.
And so at the Gazette she would show me stuff, and I just thought, God, she's a wonderful person. And as happens, it evolved, and we just became really, really close, and something had to happen. So it happened, and it evolved, and we came together. But I had never let anybody into my creative life before, Terry, and I think this is a key. I had never let anybody. I used to have assistants, and they knew they couldn't walk in past a certain area. That was my creative zone.
Right.
She walked into my office and walked into my zone, and I had no problem with it.
Oh, interesting.
Looking after the computer. And I said, what? What is this?
Yeah, how'd that happen?
Yeah, and she didn't know the rules. She didn't know anything. Anyway. So over the next couple of years, we fell in love, and I wish everybody the luck that I had in meeting a Mary. I wish everybody had a Mary or the equivalent, because it just two of the most unlikeliest people in the world, because she's gentle and nice and honest and sincere, and I had this reputation for being, even at that point, I had sobered up. A little grumpy.
You were telling me you've been watching our new mayor carefully, right? Not a lot of cartoons, but they're coming.
Not yet. They'll be coming, yeah. People think that you do it right away. Brian Mulroney, one of my greatest ever wonderful subjects, it was 2.5 years before I started.
Really?
He was in for 2.5 years before I started to just suggest in cartoons that maybe this guy was interesting.
And then
I think with Coderre is interesting, clearly.
Yeah.
But I don't sense yet an Achilles heel.
Yeah, gotcha.
You follow me?
Yeah, absolutely.
I haven't quite got it about him yet, but it will happen. Yeah. It has to happen.
There's a time when you're going to do this, right?
It'll happen.
Speaking of this, I've never asked you this before, and if it's none of my business, just tell me so. The tattoo.
Yeah.
I've always been curious about it.
Well, people think you've been in jail, right? Because that's quite common, apparently.
Is it? I don't know anything about it. Because I've interviewed you before on the radio, and we talk with our hands, and I've always.
It's a reminder, Terry. What it is that it's a reminder that we're human. This might sound a little esoteric, and I'm sorry for that, but the Japanese symbol for fulfillment and completion and so on is a full circle. But a broken circle is the symbol for humanity. In other words, nobody's perfect. Nothing is perfect. There's always a flaw. It's like the Greek urn, the cracked Greek urn. So that's a reminder to me that it's okay. You can make the occasional mistake, or it's all right. It's okay. It's like a wonderful symbol.
There are so many.
Is that deep enough for you?
It is.
Okay.
It's a wonderful answer.
Now let's get back to frivolous stuff.
Let's go in and look at some of the cartoons. Let's do that.
All right, let's do that.
It was in the midst of Trudeau-mania that he began taking advantage of what is described as his acid pen, working as a freelancer for the now-defunct Montreal Star, who saw his potential and they lured him into a full-time job. For almost 5 decades, Montrealers woke up in the morning sure of 2 things. The province would be in political turmoil, and the morning Aislin cartoon would put it all in perspective. He says satire is a test. Can you take it? Terry Mosher says he may make fun of Canada, but realizes it's a great place to live. Because in a lot of other countries, he would have been executed long ago. He admits that sometimes what's bad for the country is good for Aislin, and it was a line he always crossed. The honesty was and still is the essence of his work. Many politicians have asked Terry Mosher, how do I get in an Aislin cartoon? And he says, it's simple. Do something really stupid.
What do you think of when you look at the table, Terry? I mean, it's such a small fraction of the work.
Have a cartoon.
Yeah, well, I know where I'm going to start, because I'm going to tell you a story before you start to tell your stories. What year was this?
1976, and it appeared on the editorial page of the Gazette the morning after the Parti Québécois were elected, which was, I don't know if younger people today could understand the shock of that happening.
My first election, I was 18 that year. This was the cartoon that made me aware of what editorial cartooning was, because it's hard to explain to people today how big this was.
But not only that, the fact that the election of a separatist government in North America was the front page of the New York Times. The Economist did a feature. It was just boom. Let me tell you a funny story.
Yes, please do.
All these Anglos were leaving or threatening to leave. I stayed because I tripled my income. Everybody in the world wanted cartoons on the Quebec situation. And I was been tempted in '76 to go to New York because I was being printed in Time and all over the place.
Kidding.
But then when this happened, I thought, the real interesting story is here, and I've stayed, and I'm glad I did.
And that was one of the reasons you stayed, was because how interesting.
So.
Because it changed, some people would say for the better or for the worse, but on that night, it changed everything overnight. You know what I mean?
It remains, I guess, the most popular and probably important cartoon I've ever drawn. Yeah. And how it happened was very simple. I walked in, the results were coming in, and I was working at the Gazette, and I walk into the editorial board. Everybody's got a white face. They're watching these results, and it's actually happening. The PQ is being elected, and you can see the numbers. And these Anglo editorial writers sitting around with their mustaches back then, and bald heads, and terrified. And I thought, you know how it happened? I said, God, all these guys could use a value. Went to the studio and drew it in about 45 minutes.
No kidding.
And sent it to the composing room.
Because that night, the city changed, the province changed, and the country changed.
Mm-hmm. It did.
And that cartoon reflected all of it in one cartoon.
And it's actually a charming guy, Levesque. Because we all knew him. You know, I used to drink with him in Chinatown. He was one of the experts on Chinatown, unlike the Parti Québécois today, who say, "Oh, those people." Yeah. Levesque gambled in Chinatown. Yeah. I mean, we loved him. Yeah. Except for the possibility of Quebec separating.
I nearly voted for him. I was 18, and I remember everybody was so tired of Bourassa that was part of what helped glide him into office.
So did I.
Did you really?
But maybe for professional reasons, I did. Yeah, I did. I voted Parti Québécois in '76.
No kidding. Yeah. Do you remember the freaking out?
Oh yeah, I remember the freaking out.
I do too. My parents left. That was October '76. My parents were gone in March of '77 because my father worked for an elderly Jewish man who said, "If this guy gets in, it's Hitler. We're leaving." Yeah. And I think a lot of people felt that way. Did you ever consider it for 1 second? Did you ever think we're all in trouble?
No, only professional. A couple of times I was offered a job in Amsterdam once to work for the biggest paper there. New York, people had offered. When I was first getting started, I was I had developed quite a reputation for being quite a rascal, and people got off on it. So I hope I still am from time to time.
Well, you still are. Yeah. You know, I'm going to lift this off the table because this is a great example, I think, of how the tables have turned. Right?
You know, Terry, I have, having drawn something like 12,000 cartoons, and I'm still going to go at it for another couple of years. Yeah. You're always looking to get the one cartoon that sums up a situation, and this is one of them. Yeah. In terms of the Quebec nationalists' knee-jerk overreaction to the English threat. Right. They're running things, for God's sake. That's what they wanted, and they got it. And Francophones run Quebec.
And he wasn't like this. No. He was not this guy, right? He wasn't afraid of the English. It wasn't about that.
So I felt there was yet another situation where they were blaming the English for something or other. So I can't even remember what it was, but I just had this idea of, les Anglais tabarouettes, you know, and so that's a favorite cartoon for them because it sums any number of situations up.
Yeah. Drapeau was a godsend. Wasn't he?
He was wonderful. I mean, he just really was a terrific character, a strong, determined individual who just would put up with elections, but he was in charge, and he really was, and people were terrified of him. You know, he would have meetings at 11:45 in his office with all of his staff and surrounding him, and make people stand up.
No kidding.
So the trick was they would have to stand up and they want to go to lunch. Yeah. And he'd say, "This is how it is." They, okay. And then, can we go to lunch now? He was just a really crafty, wonderful guy. Wow. But anyway, this cartoon, it ended up being the best-known cartoon ever.
Yeah. Let's explain what this is for people who don't know what this is.
At the time, Henry Morgentaler, it was a very controversial figure because he was. It wouldn't be today, but he was an abortionist, and it was
huge controversy.
Huge controversy back then, and people were still shocked by that sort of thing. I had this idea for months of somebody on the phone to Morgentaler looking for an abortion. But then what does Jean Drapeau do in 1974? Yeah. He says, the Olympics can no more have a deficit than a man can have a baby. Thank you. Threw the cartoon up, and again, it just... But the funny thing was, the editorial page editor of the Gazette, it was such a controversy. He said, oh, "This is hilarious. It's brilliant, Terry. We're not going to print it."
This is genius. It's never getting in the paper.
In other words, forget it. It's just the mayor pregnant. Visually, back then, it was very upsetting. So I'm wandering through the newsroom, grumbling about this. I think it's a pretty good cartoon, having no idea how big it would get. And the sports editor said, "What's Brody Snyder, supposedly a right-wing guy? What's wrong, Terry?" I said, "Oh, they won't print this." I think I said effing or something. Cartoon. Really upset. He looked at it and he said, "That's sports related. I'll run it."
No shit. Wow.
The sports pages of the
No
Gazette.
kidding.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Did he like you? Did Drapo like you?
He pretended to. I remember him driving me home one night from.
He drove you home one night.
Yeah.
Do you have a driver?
No.
Literally drove you home.
Yeah, and another time he had my kids down and played horsey with them and stuff. I gave them grapefruit juice. He was famous for giving. And he pretended to like the cartoons,
But do you think they pissed him off?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no question. And remember, in Ottawa, we had Trudeau, so this three-way sort of Trudeau, Drapo, Levesque, and the sort of the synergy between these people, positive and negative, was just too enthrolling.
Yeah. What's this one? I don't remember the news story around this. This is Monsieur Levesque.
This is hilarious. Yeah. Levesque's in bed with an ashtray full of cigarettes, looking terrified. And Drapo behind him is saying, "I'll be gentle," backing him up, right? What happened was there was a headline in the Gazette because Drapo was not allowed, but he was a Federalist. There's no question about it. But the headline after the election said that Jean Drapeau will back up the Parti Québécois on particular issues. Right. Couldn't resist, right? Backing up René Levesque. This is for my friends, right? Yeah. And the procedure at the time was I dropped a photocopy on the editor's desk, the publisher's desk, and then went to the tavern or something, and it showed a few people and said, "This is not going to get through." Yeah. Right. And at 10:30 was the deadline in those days, and I'm still in the tavern, and I'm told a cheer just went up in the composing room. Nobody killed the cartoon. Wow. It appeared in the paper the next day, and I got to tell you, from cab drivers to university professors to francophones in the East End, everybody was talking about this. Do you believe that the Gazette would print a wonderful cartoon like this?
It's hard for people to understand how powerful.
Both the editor and publisher were out of town. Nobody saw it.
It sailed right through.
But they learned from that. Yeah. They said, "Wait a minute, this guy Aislin is really popular
and selling newspapers.
And let's give him a little
more rope."
Yeah.
And I want to get to that too, but we cannot. We've got to. I want to continue with this pile because we can't. Sure. We have to move to Mr. Trudeau. Yeah. Favorite target? Yes.
Yes.
Did he like you?
Yeah.
I think he liked you.
Turns out he did. Yeah. I didn't know for the longest time. He's
very cagey.
But I don't even have it here. But I discovered later on what his favorite cartoon was and that sort of thing. So he paid more attention to stuff than he pretended. Yeah. He pretended not to pay any attention. Yeah. He's very disdainful with the media.
Could be very aloof.
And I remember the one time I did meet him and have a long conversation with him. We talked about sketchbooks.
Is that right?
Because his kids were interested in drawing. He knew it was useless to talk to me about how I drew them or you should be doing like other politicians. He knew it was useless. So we just talked about ordinary stuff.
Did this move on to the top 10 list?
Yeah.
Because I was going to say, because this was only a couple of years ago, but this was phenomenal.
Solly Myers swinging on the wrecking ball, and I'm looking at it on television. I'm saying to myself, surely I'm not the only guy who sees this.
It cracks me up. Like when you stare at that cartoon for a while, I mean, how do you not laugh?
Exactly.
If you know.
She didn't, by the way, I'm told. She did not laugh.
I'm sure she didn't. She probably didn't like the way she drew her thighs.
Well. hyperbole is part of what we do, right?
Well, yeah.
But the gleeful sort of...
Yeah. It was Pauline Marois had just taken over.
Well, she'd been there a while, but...
This was her as premier, was it not?
Yes, as premier, with a wrecking ball.
Doing a fine job of wrecking.
And it just again went... Now we look at terms in terms of not how many newspapers are sold, but how it goes viral.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say this is a combination of actual drawing in here, because I really had to exaggerate that and that sort of silly ha 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 that Pauline always said. You know, I wanted to get that, but at the same time, but then to make sure that people understood it was the Wrecking Ball video, I put the actual visual in behind from the video. So it's a creative, wonderful sort of melding, fun process.
I want to continue with the Trudeau thing, because Trudeau is such a fascinating character to me, and I'm assuming a godsend to you, because he was such a powerful guy, and he was such an enigmatic guy. He could be very, very aloof.
Very crafty.
Very crafty. He was very popular. All of the stories about him never having, more than $1 in his pocket and always getting, walking to work and being, he never...
Yeah, he was a character, but I think more than that... you had mentioned the business of Jean Drapeau bringing us into the 20th century, whatever, in terms of making Montreal a big league city. Pierre Trudeau made us a big league nation. Remember, up until that point, we had kind of slightly goofy, wonky prime ministers like John Diefenbaker,
nice guys,
befuddled guy, or Saint Laurent, who was a kind of quiet French Canadian, a nice fellow, and then suddenly. The excitement, and this is when I started cartooning, 1967, when he became the leader, in effect, the prime minister. The excitement, the brio was phenomenal at the time.
At the time, and people forget this, the only thing that was attached, the only time mania was attached to anything was the Beatles. And suddenly that term found its way into politics, which... If you were in politics at the time, a lot of people thought that was absurd.
Charisma was the word.
That's the word.
So he just had it in spades, and I'm starting out, and I just studied his face, and fascinating, craggy face with these eyes. And so, I was very fortunate to... there you go. That's with saying to Levac, and you can imagine him saying it. Did the earth move? René, did the earth move? But look at the eyes. You see the sort of the turned up mouth and so on. It's just a lot of fun. And here the arrogance too. Joe Clark was briefly prime minister. Then the Liberals.
And I'll never forget this, because Joe Clark, and had we listened to him, had we listened to Joe Clark, we would have been in better shape as a country. Because Joe Clark said, "Listen, we got to put the gas tax up, and we've got to get our house in order." And Canadians went, "What are you, nuts? We're not paying 10 cents more a liter for gas, or a gallon, wherever it was at the time." So he ran on a budget. It didn't have enough people. It was all a complete fuck up on Joe Clark's part.
Snafu.
A complete snafu, And then Trudeau gets back into Sussex Drive.
But Joe Clark has always been a sincere, nice guy.
Absolutely.
But I don't think he's prime minister. He was a great minister of external affairs and so on. But he was not. So the suggestion,
he wasn't a good CEO.
He was also the prime minister in the Year of the Child, and I had made use of that in cartoons also. So you've got arrogant Trudeau walking back into 24 Sussex Drive. Somebody pay the babysitter, because he'd been in there for 272 days.
And plus, people when Trudeau lost office, people thought he was done. And people thought he was done, and he went home and said, "I'll show you."
And did.
Do you think, a lot of people say there wouldn't have been an Ali without a Fraser. Do you think that applies here?
Yes, very much so. It's Levac and Trudeau is one of the most fascinating periods of Canadian history.
I can't believe we lived.
And here's another thing, you mentioned Joe Clark. If they would listen, on the other hand, if Trudeau had not won that election in 1980, I'm convinced that Quebec would have separated in the referendum. Because remember, because Joe Clark was prime minister in Quebec City. They're saying, "We got this Joe Clark. He's a pussy. Not a pussy, but he's a guy and he was bending over backwards trying to be nice to Quebec and so on." Trudeau comes back in and
So Joe Clark is kind of chased from the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party. And then there's the Irishman from deep in the heart of Quebec.
Who did most of the chasing of Joe Clark.
Who did most of the chasing, yeah. Him and his minions chased Joe Clark out. And he takes control of the party, and he wins this massive majority. Massive majority.
1984.
The charming, perfectly bilingual Irishman from Quebec.
We all loved him.
I loved him. I thought I still like him personally.
Except during the campaign for the Tory leadership, there were a whole bunch of characters, and I decided to draw them as basketball players.
Right.
And then Mulroney said, "I love what you cartoonists do to my chin." Oh, do you? Do you now?
Do you now?
So I put it in a brassiere. Right? And Milla was known to, because up until that point I had drawn him, not quite nicely, as Gorgeous George. And Milla apparently said, "What happened to Aislin?" Like, he's not supposed to criticize us.
That's right. He's a friend of mine.
Yeah, because again, I think you were here at that time. The charm that Mulroney, and he was one of us. He was a Montrealer. We all knew him.
Yeah.
I used to even drink with him in Quebec City and stuff like that.
You could run into him all the time. He had lunch at Les Mâts des Oliviers and would often be there for the afternoon.
And then for the first year, there was nothing to be done because he was charming everybody and so on.
Yeah.
But then it began to crumble with a lot of stuff. Also, there's another factor here. At that point, a lot of people were saying, "Are you anti-French?" I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, Jean Drapeau, René Lévesque, Pierre Trudeau, you just draw francophones." I said, "Well, they run the show, you know." And so I was kind of glad when Mulroney came along. I could start beating up on an Anglo.
The English guy.
Yeah, an English guy.
Well, it's funny because he was as Quebecois as any Quebecer because of where he came from, up on and Bécomo on the North Shore, and complètement bilingue. Like when he spoke French, he spoke Joual. He spoke like a Quebecer, and yet he was great with an audience. And if you ever met him one-on-one, and I did a number of times, he was the nicest man.
No question about it.
And great family man, and was reviled by so many people. And I think part of his problem was this.
His mouth. You get into trouble with the mouth. And
this is a great cartoon.
He had
because of the tiny little Band-Aid on the tiny little mouth surrounded by the giant...
Just shut up.
Just... Stop.
How will you get on? Defending people like shady people like Sink Stevens. He was suddenly all of these cabinet ministers, people were in trouble. Yeah. They were at the trough. Yes. They were taking, and he was trying to justify, and it started to get really embarrassing. Yeah. So I began to really have a lot of fun, and the cartoons were popular. But also, he has an unfortunate physiognomy. He has what I call lying eyebrows.
Okay.
So they go up like that, and he's got this innocent look, but they're going up like, who, me? What, me? What? And I use that all the time. Also, they say he has a big chin. No, he just has no neck. So anyway, it was a joy. People say, did you hate Mulroney?
Well, I was going to ask you that, because when people looked at the cartoons, whether it was Lévesque or Mr. Trudeau or Mr. Mulroney, people said, boy, you really had a hate on for those guys, didn't you?
I just knew them well. That's why, Terry, what you have to understand here is when I'm drawing cartoons, they're rarely personal. It has to do with what goes on the public playing field, what interests us out there. Right. What are they doing out there? But, if René Lévesque, unfortunately, was in a car accident, it's not really a political story as such, so it doesn't interest me. I was very careful about Margaret Trudeau at the time, because she clearly had personal problems. Yes. So I drew occasional, maybe slight cartoons in reference to her, if she begged for it. Yeah. But that makes me nervous. I want to deal with Brian Mulroney getting in trouble, all these guys with payoffs and Sink Stevens and gold coins, and then he's allergic to tuna, it turns out, and I draw me. He can't smell the filth, and I just had so much fun with it.
You and I talked about it earlier today, the cartoon of him lying in the snow in Westmount.
He retired.
Yes.
And so he had bought this very public... Look, he and Miller are very public with this whole, us and society. And they had bought this very public house up on the hill in Westmount. And so I imagined him sort of out for a walk. It was just a harmless guy, out for a walk. And who else is famous for walking
in the snow?
Is Trudeau, right? So imagine him walking in the snow and Trudeau walking away having tripped him up, right? Yeah. And he's in the snow like, oh, drats, foiled again by that damn Trudeau, right? And Mila is looking at them, well, it's calling the RCMP, right?
Right.
What happened was Barbara McDougall saw it in Ottawa and was convinced that I had drawn Brian Mulroney dead in the snow. As if the Gazette's going to run a cartoon of former Prime Minister dead in the snow. Anyway, faxes denouncing us started to come in back when there were fax machines.
Yes.
And the editor, Joan Fraser, was surprised. What's going on here? Suddenly all of these, she was puzzled because she understood the cartoon.
Right.
They all had 613 area codes. They were all coming from Ottawa.
Wow.
The Tories in Ottawa were saying, and by that, and then Jack Layton's dad, Robert Layton, who was an MP at the time, a Tory MP, called Joan. Joan explained, he said, no, this isn't. He said, oh, okay. Yeah. Then he stood up and he denounced me in the House of Commons. First cartoonist in the history of Canada to be denounced in the House of Commons. A drawing on a piece of paper, Terry.
Right.
Like, aren't there other serious problems?
Well,
anyway, it was a great professional day of my life.
That's a big feather in your cap, isn't it?
That's right.
On the floor of the House of Commons, not far from where you grew up.
How dare you, un-Canadian. Schreiber comes along with this payoff stuff and brown envelopes. I mean, how tacky can you get? And it was just... Also, in terms of, it's not that much money, a couple of $100,000 that he took. You know, he took it.
Yeah.
And so I played with that for a while, but I guess my favorite Mulroney cartoon is because then Schreiber pipes up and says, actually he had $500,000 to give to Mulroney, but the effort kind of... So I have Mulroney saying, I'm suing the German for the $200,000 he didn't give me. Cash coming out of his pocket.
But there's one figure in Quebec politics that I had a visceral, hate is a strong word, but I took everything she did personally. Because as an English person, I always thought that this woman just didn't like English people. And I took it very personally. And I wondered, when she became a target for you, did you feel that way as an Anglophone? We're talking about Louise Baudouin, who was a very, very strong defender of the French language, on one hand, if you're on that side of the argument, and on the other hand, always tried to keep the English underfoot.
Yeah, that's the perception, and I think she probably did, because she was one of those people who felt definitely threatened by the English language. And remember, Louise had been on my radar screen for a long time because she's very much a part of the Parti Québécois and the establishment. She was always here. There was also the silly business in Paris where a former FLQ guy was caught in her apartment. So there was always this sort of uneasiness about Louise. Louise Baudouin is a very charming individual, actually. If you speak to her at a party in a francophone...
Really?
Yeah. When Louise became language minister, there was a certain... When she would speak in English... There was a speaking down kind of head... A
condescending disdain.
Like that.
Yeah. You don't understand.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody was having the same reaction.
Yeah,
I was getting this, I hate that woman. Yeah. I hate that woman. Yeah. And so it seemed to me that she was trying to dominate, so I drew her...
This is a top 10, isn't it?
Yeah. Started a whole bunch of them.
Yeah,
I started drawing her as a dominatrix in leather and and cattle prods and whips and chains and that sort of thing. And everybody was shocked at the beginning. I was shocked that Gazette actually started to print them, but they did.
Really?
Yeah. I thought, whoa, this is great.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, she was interviewed at La Presse, and she said that Aislin in the Gazette in La Presse draws me as an SS officer, and I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I wrote a letter to La Presse saying, no, not SS, dominatrix.
Yeah.
And besides, it's a classic English sexual fantasy, you'd be dominated.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Now
people began to get it.
Yeah.
They began to understand.
She made me feel not welcome in my own home province. This I love because this is not just the cartoon. It's hilarious because it's Air Poutine.
Air Poutine to Paris. J'arrive! She was saying, she said France is not French enough, you know?
That's right. So she's coming to the rescue.
Yeah.
But if you look closely at this, and I'm sure the guys will get a shot of that, this is autographed by Louise Baudouin, which is fantastic.
It was after
Tell the story.
After she retired, and an English film crew were interviewing him, and interviewing Louise, sorry.
Yeah.
And they asked her about the cartoons, and she said, well, I began to understand. I did this, that, and the other. And they said, would you sign a cartoon for Aislin? She said, I'd love to.
Oh, wow.
No, she said, Aislin, je regrette votre absence dans ma vie. She was sorry that I was no longer part of her life. So that's the part of a politician beginning to understand and say, and Jules Duceppe with the shower cap.
The shower cap, yeah, the hair.
It took him 14 years, but he came around.
Also a great cartoon.
Yeah, the greatest.
And I think that one had a political effect, didn't it?
It did.
It did.
It did.
It hurt
but
them.
What I'm saying is he hated that cartoon for years, and we'll talk about it. But then we had a cartoon convention here, and he showed up.
Have you ever drawn a cartoon that made it to print that you regretted?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, not that I can think of. During the FLQ crisis, they killed a cartoon, and I'm glad they did. Because way back then, during the FLQ crisis, I had drawn a cartoon. I was working for the Montreal Star at the time, of the lawyer, Lemieux, you remember?
Yeah.
The FLQ lawyer.
Yeah.
As a travel agent, kind of cheeky, getting these guys to Cuba and Algeria and that sort of thing. And they said, no, we're not going to print this. And I was upset. But I'm glad they didn't print it, because the following day Laporte was murdered. And it would have looked very, very crass.
Yeah.
So occasionally things like that happen. But look, editors have to do their job, and sometimes we make them nervous, and I hope we do. You know?
That's your job, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
But they do come and go, Terry. I mean...
And you're still here.
My wife bought me this ring, and I'm not a biker, it's a bunch of skulls.
Yeah.
It's all the editors I've survived at the Gazette. I'm still here.
I was struck today when I was into your house. We had a brief tour of your house, and you had your files that started in the 1970s. And that file cabinet is a history of the country and the province.
I can announce here, I think for the first time, the McCord Museum is going to have an exhibition entitled Alias Aislin, 50 Years of Aislin Cartoons.
50 years?
Yeah.
2017. Oh, of course, 1967.
Yeah.
Wow. Does that make you happy? Does it bother you?
It doesn't bother me a bit.
No way.
I think geography is a good thing. Geography's proved you a little bit, and so we've all got geography on our faces and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course.
No, I've never been bothered by
the passage of time.
By getting older. Nice young ladies say "sir" to you on the elevator. I mean, it's kind of.
You take advantage of your seniors' discounts? No.
Oh, senior, sure.
Yeah. Senior nights at the movie.
I don't know. I guess it's been such, and as I say, I'm going to keep going for a few years.
Yeah.
It's been such a satisfying career, and I've also very fortunate in terms of my family and some very good friends and so on, and so I've had a good life.
Life
so
well lived.
If I drop dead tomorrow, I'd be okay with it.
God forbid. Let's end with this, Terry, because I mean, author doesn't even begin to. How many books is it now?
46.
Jeez Louise.
Putting together on 47th ring.
And you know what? What's really fascinating for anybody who wants to look into it is the cartoons. It's really been fascinating to watch the evolution of your style, and I guess part of it has to do with the time and place and the technology that was available to you. You know, and these are cartoons from this would be the 1970s, right? Mr. Trudeau Goes West. Yeah. These are a little bit more involved. There are more panels involved and a little. So this was your very first book?
First book.
Aislin's 100 Caricatures.
Yeah.
And on the cover?
Mr. Trudeau is a swinger. Look at the eyebrow. Just that mouth. I love drawing that guy.
How long would that have taken you?
Oh, that would have taken 5 or 6 hours, I guess.
And I'm going to close with this because there's 46 books, so there are too many of them to hold up. We brought a bunch of them. There's and a lot of very influential people have done forwards for you.
Yes, they have.
Right? This one was done by Ed Broadbent with a cover of Mr. Mulroney, or a cover cartoon of Mr. Mulroney on the lawn of the White House.
As a lawn jockey.
A commentary on his friendship with Mr. Reagan.
Americans.
He sure did. And this is a favorite Montreal cartoon because Montrealers still talk about this.
When Toronto called in the army.
We had just finished our ice storm, and they were dying for their own ice storm. I think they were a little jealous. So they had what? I think they had 11 inches of snow or something, 11 centimeters.
Mel Lastman.
Mel Lastman, right.
He called in the army.
It's the equivalent of calling the National Guard in because they had like 10 inches of snow.
So I got this Torontonian. You remember they used to wear those pork pie hats all the time, and I thought they looked cool, you know. And Mayday, Mayday, my Volvo won't start, you know.
What a terrific. When is
this is
this is Miley, right?
Chantal Hebert wrote an introduction to that one, and Rick Mercer to this one. So you're right. We've got some good people. Yeah,
some really. I mean, do you feel like a national treasure? Because you are.
I'll tell you what. I'm a bit of a homebody now, and I enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy getting out.
But you're nationally known.
Listening to I know. But getting up and
internationally known.
I keep pretty well focused most of the time on coming up with that daily cartoon, whatever it happens to be. So occasionally when I go out, I just. If I'm prepared for it, but occasionally I'm walking around in a mall or something, and suddenly a couple of people walk up and they look at you like, I got to tell you, they look at you like, like, oh my God, you're Aislin or something. And Chaplin I've talked to, because he gets a lot more of it, right, on the French side. And you want to say, it's okay, I took a quiet shit this morning. I'm just like you. You know what I mean? Because it's a little embarrassing sometimes.
You don't feel like Aislin, you feel like Terrence Mosher, right?
I feel like a guy who draws cartoons and gets a real kick out of it, and I'm glad other people do.
Right. But you forget.
But there's nothing mystical about me.
No.
That's what I do, and I happen to be, I think, pretty good at it. I'm not good at a lot of other things. My wife covers all that. Mary covers all that.
And you know what I think also helps is, I think this is the signature now, right? Snow white hair, snow white beard. When did it go gray? Because let me just quickly, before we say goodbye, there's a picture of you with Leonard Cohen, and who's the lovely lady in the middle? I don't know.
You caught me there.
Yeah, but there's the beard. And
she ended up being a counselor in Westmount.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. There's the beard, and there's the
She
hair
wasn't there.
I didn't think so. And it's because don't you think it's become a bit of a trademark?
It has,
because it is on the Gazette webpage.
It's deliberate because in the age of the internet, people say you have to have a brand. Yeah. So the Gazette says, let's take that that photo of you with the drawing with the pencil through your ears and brand. So they use it everywhere, and I use it a lot too. And it's so it works well. So it's a brand. So that's what people know.
It's really nice to have the legend at
It's really nice to talk to you,
at the kitchen table.
Nice house.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm
just like the old days.
Yeah. I'm incredibly grateful for how generous you've been with your time, and it's really nice to know you on a personal level now. You know, we've gone from me looking at you in the newspaper to somebody that I know a great deal about and care very much about. So thanks for doing
Well, I appreciate your comments from time to time about the cartoon. I really do.
Yeah, we'll talk about it all the time. Pleasure. Thanks so much. Come on, I'll show you to the door.
All right.